The staff at his sprawling Montana ranch whispered about him. Arthur Harrison, the reclusive tech billionaire. They said he was colder than the mountain peaks. A man whose heart was locked away, untouched by anyone. But that day, when he strode into the echoing silence of his thoroughbred stables, he froze. There, huddled in the clean straw of an empty stall, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8, her clothes torn and filthy, her hair a matted tangle. She was fast asleep, her small body trembling, but her hands were locked around a faded photograph, holding it against her chest as if it were life itself. Arthur, a man who managed $1 billion empire from this remote fortress, a man who flinched from human contact, felt something crack deep inside him. He didn't know it yet, but this tiny... What city are you watching this video from and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. The hiss of the Aston Martin's tires on the gravel driveway was the only sound that dared challenge the Montana silence. The car stopped. Inside, Arthur Harrison sat motionless, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He stared through the windshield at the dusty track leading to the stables. He was 40 years old, the CEO of Harrison Microsystems, a giant in the semiconductor world. He was used to sterile labs, strategic meetings, and communicating through data, not emotions. In the tech world, he was a legend. Here, in the remote valley he'd turned into his fortress, he was a ghost. Arthur was a man tormented by his past. A cruel stepmother had shattered his childhood, leaving him with a crippling aversion to human touch. Any unexpected contact, especially from a woman, would send panic jolting through his veins, making his skin crawl and his breath catch. There was one exception, Mrs. Davis, the housekeeper who had practically raised him. She was the only woman whose presence didn't trigger the panic. This condition had become his prison, forcing him into a life of isolation, far from marriage or intimacy. He was only here because his ranch manager had called about disturbances in the stables. Against his will, he had to see for himself. He got out of the car, his bespoke suit looking alien against the rustic landscape, and walked to the barn. The door creaked open. The smell of hay and old wood filled his lungs. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, and then he saw it. And froze. In the corner, huddled on a pile of fresh straw, was a small figure. A girl. She was tiny, her clothes filthy rags. Her bare feet were caked in dust. Her arms were wrapped tightly around a faded photograph. Arthur stood pinned to the spot. He never had visitors, let alone stray children. His voice, rough from disuse, broke the silence. "Hey, what are you doing here?" The sound startled her. The girl scrambled upright, her eyes wide with pure terror, clutching the photo as if he'd come to steal it. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please don't make me go back. I just needed a place to sleep." Arthur frowned. He was used to the calculated glances of adults, but the raw fear in this child's eyes, it disarmed him. He took a step closer. Strangely, his body didn't react. The usual tightness in his chest, the urge to retreat from another person's presence. It wasn't there. He knelt, bringing his eyes level with hers. "How long have you been here?" She just shook her head, her small shoulders trembling. Arthur kept his voice low. "What's your name?" A pause. Then a whisper so faint he almost missed it. "Sophie," he nodded. "Sophie." "Do your parents know where you are?" Tears instantly welled in her eyes. She bit her lip and looked down. "Please, I'm so scared. Please don't take me home." In those tear-filled eyes, Arthur saw himself. He remembered being 8 years old, trembling in a closet, praying his stepmother wouldn't find him. The feeling of being a burden, an unwanted thing, had never truly left him. It was just hidden beneath $1 billion armor. He didn't say anything else. He just stood up, and in a move that shocked himself, he reached down and gently lifted the girl from the straw. She was light as a bird. She tensed but didn't fight. He carried her out of the stable and toward the main lodge. It was the first time in over 20 years he had held another person without recoiling. The massive oak doors of the lodge opened into a grand room. "Mr. Harrison?" "You're back already?" A woman in her late 60s, Mrs. Davis, appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She had worked for the Harrison family for 40 years and was the only person Arthur truly trusted. She stopped dead when she saw the small, filthy bundle in his arms. "My goodness, Arthur. What on earth?" Arthur gently placed Sophie on a plush leather sofa. "I found her in the stable." "She's freezing, Mrs. Davis." The housekeeper's stern expression melted. "Oh, you poor dear. You look half-starved." She sat opposite the girl. "What's your name, honey?" Sophie just clutched the photograph, her eyes darting between the two adults. "Her name is Sophie," Arthur said quietly. "She's been holding that picture ever since I found her." "Who's in the photo, sweetie?" Mrs. Davis asked. With trembling hands, the girl held it out. It's my mom. She's gone." The room fell silent. Arthur looked at the smiling woman in the photo. Her eyes, he realized, were just like Sophie's. Bright, but carrying a hint of sadness. Mrs. Davis hurried to the kitchen and returned with a steaming mug of hot chocolate. "Here, child. This will warm you up." Sophie hesitated, looking at Arthur for permission. He gave a small, stiff nod. Only then did she take the mug in both hands and take tiny sips. Arthur sat nearby, his hands clasped. "Sophie, where is your father?" The girl froze. The mug rattled in her hands. Her knuckles turned white. After a long, terrible silence, she spoke in broken fragments. He's at home." "With her? Her?" My stepmom. She hates me." The words came out in a rush, a dam of terror breaking. "She says I look just like Mom. She says Dad will never love me. She doesn't let me eat." Arthur felt a cold fury rise in his throat. "And Dad?" Sophie's voice cracked into a sob. "Dad just yells. He yells at me. He says it's my fault. It's my fault Mom is dead." Her body shook with violent sobs. "She died coming to get me from school. I begged her to pick me up early. It's my fault. It's all my fault." Arthur's fists clenched. Mrs. Davis gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. Arthur stared at the little girl, his own past screaming at him. He knew better than anyone what it felt to be branded with a guilt that didn't belong to you. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study, the image of Sophie's face burned into his mind. He found her hours later, not in the guest room Mrs. Davis had prepared, but back in the stable. She was sitting on a hay bale clutching the photo. "Still awake?" he asked softly. She nodded, her lip trembling. "I'm scared. When I close my eyes, I see my mom. Then I wake up and I'm scared she'll be there." A sharp pain lanced through Arthur's chest. He pulled up a small stool and sat near her. "When I was your age," he said, his voice rough, "my stepmother used to lock me in the dining room. She told me I didn't deserve to eat with the family." Sophie's wide, tearful eyes met his. You got in trouble too?" A tight, humorless smile touched his lips. "All the time. I learned to survive, and you will too. You're not alone, Sophie." She stared at him, then whispered, "You're not like my dad. You don't yell." He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment, and then gently rested it on her tangled hair. She flinched but didn't pull away. "Come on," he said, standing. "Let's feed the horses. It might make you feel better." He led her to the stalls, pouring feed into her small, cupped hands. A large chestnut mare lowered its head and gently lipped the grain from her palm. Sophie gasped, her eyes flying open, and then a small, watery giggle escaped her. It was the first time he'd heard her make a sound that wasn't born from fear. The sound hit him like a physical blow. He watched her, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. "See?" he said. "She likes you." Sophie covered her mouth, her eyes sparkling. "I've never fed a horse before." Arthur's brow furrowed. "What do you do at home?" "Dishes," she said quietly. "And I clean the floors. Veronica, my stepmom, she says I have to earn my keep." Before Arthur could process the rage that welled up, a flashlight beam cut through the stable doorway. "Mr. Harrison? That you in there?" It was Hank Henderson, his nosy neighbor from the next ranch over, a man who always seemed to know everyone's business. Hank squinted into the dim light, his eyes landing on Sophie. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. Isn't that Richard Johnson's girl?" The name hit Arthur like a freight train. Sophie went rigid. The photo slipped from her hands and landed in the straw. Arthur picked it up and handed it back to her, his gaze locked on her terrified face. He already knew the answer, but he had to hear it. "Sophie," he said, his voice level. "What is your father's name?" She just trembled, her eyes flooding with fresh tears as she stared at the photo. Her fingers gripped the frame so hard her knuckles were white. Arthur waited, the silence of the stable punctuated only by the soft shuffling of the horses and the girl's choked sobs. He had his answer. The next morning, Arthur was in his office before sunrise. He confirmed it in his records. Richard Johnson, 45, owner of a local auto body shop. Wife Sarah Johnson, deceased 1 year prior, auto accident. Second wife Veronica. Daughter Sophie, 8. "You can't keep her, Arthur," Mrs. Davis said, placing a coffee on his desk. She was the only one who dared challenge him. "You have to take her back. A father is still a father." Arthur slammed his hand on the desk, scattering pens. "Take her back?" His voice was a low growl. "Back to that? To be told she's a murderer? To be starved and treated like a slave? Did you see her eyes, Mrs. Davis? She's terrified." The door creaked open. Sophie stood there, her eyes red. She had heard everything. "Please." "Uncle," she whispered, the name new. "Please don't make me go back." Arthur's expression softened. He knelt in front of her. "I won't," he said, his voice a raw promise. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." That afternoon, he took her into town to buy new clothes. As they were leaving the general store, a woman stopped them. Sophie Johnson?" She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Ms. Gable, Sophie's third-grade teacher." She pulled him aside, her voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper. "Thank God she's with you. We've all been so worried. I've seen the bruises. I've called the house, but Veronica, that woman, she always had an excuse. Sophie fell. Sophie's clumsy. We suspected, but Richard is... Well, he hasn't been right since Sarah died, and Veronica runs that house. Everyone's afraid of her." Arthur's jaw tightened. "From now on, she's safe." As he drove back to the ranch, a black pickup truck, brand new and aggressively loud, sped past them and swerved into his driveway. Blocking the entrance, a man and a woman got out. The man, Richard Johnson, looked haggard, his face gaunt and his eyes bloodshot. The woman, Veronica, was the opposite. Immaculate, dressed in expensive jeans, her blonde hair perfect, her red lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Mr. Harrison?" Veronica said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Our Sophie, she's a handful, always running off for attention." "She was freezing and starved in your stable," Arthur said, his voice flat. In the passenger seat, Sophie let out a small whimper and tried to sink into the upholstery. Richard saw her. His face contorted in rage. He stormed over to the car and yanked the passenger door open. "Sophie, get out! Get in the truck now!" he roared. "You think you can just run away? After everything? You are the reason your mother is dead." "You killed her! No!" Sophie screamed, dissolving into hysterical sobs. "That's enough." Arthur's voice cut through the air like a whip. He got out of his car and stood between Richard and the child. "You will not speak to her that way. This is family business, Harrison." Richard spat, his eyes wild. "You have no right." "Richard, honey, calm down," Veronica cooed, placing a hand on his arm. But Richard's eyes had locked onto the photo in Sophie's lap. His face went white. "Sarah," he whispered. He staggered back, his breathing ragged. "My God, Sarah." He clutched his head, sinking to his knees. "The crash, I remember..." Veronica's smile vanished. "Richard, get up. You're making a scene. The brakes!" he gasped, his eyes wide with a dawning, unimaginable horror. "I remember the smell. Burning. They didn't work. The red light. Oh, God." He looked up, not at Arthur, but at his new wife. "Veronica?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "The car. I took it to the shop the day before. You picked it up. Veronica, what did you do to the car?" Before we continue, please take a moment to leave a comment about this story and rate it from 1 to 10. How are you feeling? If there's anything you'd like to share, I'm always here to listen. I hope you find a moment of peace and reflection as you follow this healing story and its journey of courage and justice. Veronica's mask didn't just crack. It shattered. For one terrifying second, pure cold panic flashed in her eyes. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a venomous rage. "Richard, you're having a nervous breakdown," she hissed, yanking his arm. "Get in the truck. You don't know what you're saying." But Richard was on his knees in the gravel, sobbing, staring at his own shaking hands. "The shop. You took the car. You said you'd get the brakes checked. Enough," Veronica shrieked. Her perfectly manicured mask was gone, revealing something ugly beneath. She turned on Arthur, her face a knot of contempt. "You? This is what you do? You poison him against me. You're trying to steal my husband's child. Get off my property," Arthur said. His voice was deadly quiet, colder than any Montana winter. Sophie was trembling so hard in the car seat that Arthur could hear her teeth chattering. He opened the back door, and with a gentleness that still felt foreign to him, unbuckled her and lifted her out, shielding her small body with his own. Veronica, seeing she had lost all control, dragged the weeping Richard to the truck. "This isn't over, Harrison," she screamed, her voice echoing across the valley. "You can't just keep her. I'll have the sheriff. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." The truck spat gravel and sped away. Arthur carried Sophie inside, his heart hammering against his ribs. The usual allergic-like reaction he felt to contact was there, a faint itch on his arms. But it was drowned out by a wave of protective fury so powerful it almost made him dizzy. "Mrs. Davis," he called out, his voice firm. "Call Dr. Evans, have him come here. Then get me Elias Thorne and Helena, the best family lawyer in the state. Tell him it's an emergency. Tell him to bring an investigator." The next few days were a blur. Elias Thorne, a sharp silver-haired man who radiated competence, flew in on a private charter. He listened to Arthur's story, his face grim. "This is no longer a simple custody case, Arthur," Elias said, sipping the coffee Mrs. Davis had set down. "If what you suspect is true, we're building a case for murder." While Arthur stayed at the ranch, protecting Sophie, Thorne's private investigator went to work. It didn't take long. They found him, Frank, a mechanic at a small, failing auto body shop on the highway, the one Richard had mentioned. At first, Frank denied everything. But when faced with bank records and the threat of being an accessory to murder, he crumbled. "I didn't know," he wept, sitting in Elias Thorne's temporary office in town. Veronica, she came in with the car, said her husband was complaining the brakes were too sensitive. She paid me $5,000 in cash. Told me to loosen them up, make them softer. I thought she was just a rich woman who didn't know cars. I swear to God, I didn't know she wanted that." "Did she sign anything?" Elias asked, his voice like ice. No, cash, but I kept the work order. For my own files. It was all they needed." The emergency custody hearing was held in the small county courthouse. The room was packed. The entire valley, it seemed, had shown up. Veronica was there, dressed in a demure black suit, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, playing the part of the grieving widow. "Your Honor," her lawyer began, "my client is heartbroken. And in the midst of her grief, this reclusive billionaire, Mr. Harrison, has abducted her stepdaughter. That abducted child showed up on my client's property half-starved and covered in filth," Elias Thorne countered. "We believe she was not just neglected but actively abused." "Lies," Veronica cried out. "She's a troubled child. She's always told stories. And my poor husband. He's mentally ill. He doesn't know what he's saying." "Then let's hear from someone who isn't troubled or ill," Elias said. "I call Ms. Gable to the stand." Sophie's third-grade teacher walked up, her hands trembling. She recounted the bruises, the phone calls, Veronica's smooth, dismissive excuses. Next was the clerk from the general store, who testified that Sophie often came in alone to buy small items, a can of soup, a box of crackers, with a handful of change. The neighbor, Hank Henderson, testified to hearing violent, screaming arguments from the Johnson house, and seeing Sophie forced to do yard work in the snow. The air in the courtroom grew thick. "The town was turning. This is all circumstantial," Veronica's lawyer insisted. "You have no proof!" "On the contrary," Elias said, his voice ringing with sudden power. "The defense claims Mrs. Johnson is a grieving widow. We intend to prove she is, in fact, the architect of her own widowhood." I call Frank Rizzo to the stand. When the mechanic walked in, Veronica's face drained of all color. Frank, given immunity for his testimony, told the court everything. The cash, the specific, chilling request to loosen the brakes, the work order he kept. And Elias delivered the final blow. We have bank records showing a $5,000 cash withdrawal from Mrs. Johnson's personal account on the exact day this work order was filed. A collective gasp filled the room. Veronica stood up so fast her chair screeched. He's lying. They're all lying! That little brat. Mrs. Veronica Johnson. A new voice cut through the chaos. The local sheriff, who had been standing quietly at the back of the courtroom, was now walking forward, his hand on his service weapon. You are under arrest for the solicitation of vehicular tampering, felony child abuse, and the murder of Sarah Johnson. Veronica's face contorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered hate. She lunged, not for the exit, but toward Sophie. You little monster! You ruined everything. Arthur moved faster than he ever had in his life. He scooped Sophie up, turning his back to Veronica as the sheriff and a deputy tackled her. He held the little girl tight, her face buried in his neck, as she was handcuffed and dragged, screaming from the courtroom. You'll pay, she shrieked, her voice echoing in the hall. You'll all pay. In the sudden, stunned silence, Arthur looked across the room. Richard Johnson was sitting in the back row, his head in his hands, weeping, a completely broken man. The sheriff paused, looked at him, and then gently put a hand on his shoulder. Richard, I think you need to come with us, son. We need to get you some help. Veronica was found guilty on all counts. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Richard Johnson, his mind shattered by the trauma of the accident and the guilt of his neglect, was committed to the Montana State Hospital. Arthur was granted full, permanent, and uncontested legal custody of Sophie. A few months later, he drove her to the hospital. Richard was behind a thick pane of safety glass, his eyes vacant and heavily medicated. When he saw Sophie, a flicker of recognition ignited. Sarah? No, you're... Sophie, my girl. He pressed his hand flat against the glass, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. I didn't protect you. Sophie, holding Arthur's hand, stepped forward and pressed her own small hand against the glass, mirroring his. I forgive you, Dad, she whispered. Arthur felt his chest tighten. He watched this 8-year-old girl show a capacity for grace he'd never known. It was the last time she would ever see her biological father. Life on the ranch began. It was slow, awkward. Arthur didn't know how to be a parent. He taught her to ride. He sat in the front row at her first school play, his suit feeling stiff and out of place. He learned to comfort her when she had nightmares about the red car or that woman's voice. Mrs. Davis taught her to bake, filling the massive, sterile lodge with the smell of chocolate chip cookies and the sound of Sophie's laughter. One night, almost a year later, Arthur was reading a market report in his study. Sophie, now 9, came in wearing her pajamas. She didn't say anything, just crawled onto the leather armchair opposite him with a book. They sat in comfortable silence for an... Mom would have liked you, Arthur, she said suddenly, not looking up from her page. Arthur froze. He looked at her, this small person who had completely dismantled his world. The old familiar panic, the aversion to touch, was a distant memory. I think I would have liked her too, he replied, his voice thick. Sophie closed her book and looked at him, her eyes clear and serious. Can I call you Dad? Arthur Harrison, the cold, reclusive billionaire, felt the armor he'd worn for 30 years melt away. He couldn't speak. He just nodded, his eyes burning. She ran to him, and he pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. The physical contact he had feared his entire life now felt like the only thing that had ever been real. The sprawling, high-tech fortress was gone. In its place was the Sarah's Haven, a therapeutic riding center for at-risk youth. Sophie Harrison, now 23, a bright young woman with a degree in psychology, stood on the porch, watching a new, shy 10-year-old boy learn to brush a horse, his fear slowly melting away. The ranch was loud now. It was filled with the laughter of children who, like her, had been given a second chance. The door opened and Arthur, now 55, his hair more salt than pepper, came out holding 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to her. "You've built something incredible here, Soph," he said, his voice full of a quiet pride that was now his default setting. "No, Dad," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We built it. You taught me that a home isn't a place, it's a person." He smiled, putting his arm around her. "You know," he said, looking out at the mountains, "the staff used to say my heart was locked away. I guess I was just waiting for the right person to come along with the key." Sophie smiled, holding the warm mug. "And all I had was a faded photograph." The story of the billionaire and the orphan became a local legend. It wasn't a fairy tale, but a testament to a simple, powerful truth. Evil, like Veronica's, is loud and hollow, and eventually burns itself to ash. But goodness, the quiet courage of a child and the reluctant bravery of a broken man, is a force that heals, rebuilds, and creates a love powerful enough to last a lifetime.